Okay, well, the Gladiator movie. There was a lot going on in Gladiator, obviously, right? First of all, the major premise was that you had human beings, right, who are enslaved to die for the entertainment of others, right? So it's a little, messed up to begin with. There's a few things to get out of there. First of all, I want to sort of underscore the concept of the mob, right? So these were the Roman citizens who were there enjoying the entertainment. And the thing about the mob is that the mob acts selfishly and also emotionally, right? So you'll notice in there that these people are calling for blood and whatnot, and not even aware that, these are human beings that are dying. And most importantly, what I wanted to make sure that we get is this. If you recall the scene wherein the Emperor Marcus Aurelius calls in his son Commodus and says, "You will not be emperor. That's your duty for Rome." And in his reply, Commodus says, "You mentioned to me once the 4 chief virtues, and I want to list them here." So the 4 chief virtues of the ancient world are wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. And just real quick, so these in ancient Rome and Greece too were thought to be the 4 most important virtues for being a good person. Wisdom is to know the whole and to know, what to do. Justice is to always act, in a way that is fair. Courage is the ability to act with fairness and to do what we know is right. And then lastly, temperance is the ability to rein in our emotions so that we're not too fearful to be courage, we're not too self-interested to be unjust, and we're not too interested in entertainment to seek wisdom. And so we'll call these the 4 chief virtues. Now, if you remember in that scene, Commodus said, "Well, I don't have these virtues, but I have my own." And he said, rather than wisdom, ambition. Rather than justice, resourcefulness. And he said courage, but not on a battlefield. So I'm going to say other courage. And then finally he said not temperance, but rather devotion. And I think he mentioned specifically to family, devotion to family. So these are Commoduses, right? So these are the 4 chief virtues, and these are Commoduses. And I just want to sort of take a minute to look at how these are different, right? So take the distinction between wisdom and ambition. So ambition is about, doing something for oneself, right? So one's own gain. Whether it's in terms of power, whether it's in terms of money, ambition is about self-promotion. As opposed to wisdom, wisdom is something that we go after, right? So wisdom is there, and we have to work hard and have discipline in order to gain wisdom. So notice one is very selfish, and one is very selfless. Likewise, the distinction between justice and resourcefulness, right? Resourcefulness is a good skill, think MacGyver or something, right? Resourceful means that you can exploit a situation to, get your short-term goal. So if a resourceful person is also ambitious, the two can allow somebody to rise and to get what they want. Because, resourcefulness allows you to be creative in getting rid of obstacles. But resourceful is not just, necessarily. Resourceful is to get what you want. Just is to get what is right. to get what is fair. So often, ambition and resourcefulness might make us succeed in our agendas, but that doesn't mean that our agendas are just and wise. Lastly, he said, next, courage, but he said specifically, Commodus did, courage not on a battlefield, and that is significant. Because courage on a battlefield, and call to mind, if you will, the opening scene where the Roman legions are fighting the Germans. And if you recall, all the legions are very disciplined. They fight for each other. They maintain their ranks. In other words, they have courage to face an enemy and to do so with discipline, because that's the only way that the whole will be successful. Whereas other types of courage, I mean, you could say that stabbing somebody in the back could take courage. Indeed, it could. Robbing a bank could take courage, right? So courage, though, for our resourceful or ambitious purposes is not the kind of selfless courage for a higher purpose that we're talking about. And lastly, temperance. Temperance is the ability to control our emotions. There's another word that we could use called moderation, which is quite similar. The difference is this. Temperance is about controlling our emotions. Moderation is about controlling bodily appetites. But notice, rather than temperance, Commodus says, well, I have devotion. But devotion is also related to obsession, right? Like, we've got to be careful. And he mentioned, I think, devotion to family, which is fine. Which, then, if he strangled his father in the next instant, you got to really wonder about his devotion, right? And his incestuous relationship with his sister. But, again, if we're going to say we're devoted to family, does that mean then if I'm going to become emperor, I give my family all kinds of, graft and money and positions, right? Does that mean nepotism? Or if my family is wrong and commits crimes, do I support them without question? These are the issues, right? But notice, if we kind of put it together, these four chief traditional virtues are really about being selfless. Whereas these virtues here, oh, come on, man, are about being selfish. And so then we ask ourselves this question, right? If Commodus has these kinds of ambitions, and he's resourceful, and he's courageous in his plots against people, and he's obsessed with family gain, notice this is the new virtue of empire, right? Because in the empire, it's not so much about us anymore, it's about me. And Commodus wants to rule for himself, not for other people. But notice in the Republic, right, literally our leaders have to be selfless. They have to be wise, they have to be just, they have to be courageous and temperate, not for themselves, but for the whole, right? So it's literally for not me, and that's the only way that you can really run a republic. Because in a republic, you're asking the leader to be in charge of a tremendous amount of wealth and power. And the only person that can do that is somebody who is not interested in themselves, but rather what's good for the republic. And so these are the old values of republic, the Roman Republic. These are the new values of guys like Commodus. And the main difference is selfish versus selfless. And then obviously we ask ourselves, the mob, who are they going to support? Well, if they too have the new values, of empire, they're going to support a guy who is going to talk about their ambition, who is going to be resourceful in giving them what they want, who is going to give them things other than courage. For instance, you might say, a good example might be the gladiator shows themselves, right? Here people feel a sense of power by watching others die, who themselves would never have the courage to go in the ring. And ultimately, the way to get the mob on your side is to entertain them. And as long as they are entertained because they are selfish and they want to be entertained, they will follow whoever gives them entertainment. Hence, the point in that is, boy, what happens when a republic of citizens descends by and large to an empire with a mob? By that time, critical thinking is out the window. And that's what paves the way for a tyrant like Commodus.